Hi, welcome to 90who10. I'm Jessica Entner.
And I'm Dan Eisenstein.
And we have got our fantastic guest, Mike Azria, with us today, who is a dear old friend of ours and has lots of fantastic Los Angeles stories for us to dive into today. Hi, how are you?
Mike.
Hi, hello.
We were just saying how you look the same, like exactly the same.
And like I said, I was thinking the same about you guys. So.
Yeah.
So let's dive right into it. Tell us about you and who you are and where you were born and a little bit about your early life.
All right. Well, that's why they call it the hot seat, I guess. I was born in Paris, France. Lived there for about 9 years, first 9 years of my life. And one day my dad was like, get packed, we're going to America. And I was like, cool, where's America? What is America? I had no idea where we were going, literally. And next thing you know, we were on a plane. We landed in LA, me, my mom, my dad, my two little sisters. And we drove to a house in Los Feliz, which was like, I'd never seen anything like it. It was in the hills, swimming pool, view of downtown LA, palm trees. I mean, it was like the biggest culture shock in the world.
Yeah.
But what shocked me the most was that we had a lady there who I guess took care of the house and maybe cleaned or whatever. And she had made breakfast for us. And I looked at the table and I recognized nothing. It was like being in Japan or something. It was like Wonder Bread, orange juice and milk together, cereal. I'd never seen cereal. So, you know,
Wow.
it was a pretty big culture shock. I didn't speak the language. I think 2 days later, I was in a school. I think it was Los Feliz Elementary or something like that. I was a huge minority. I think, if I recall correctly, the only like Caucasian girl was a girl named Star. And here I am in this like place. I think it was like a Christian school or a Catholic school or something. Like, it was so weird. And I didn't speak a word of English, but everyone was really friendly to me because I was wearing these like almost like knee-high like Han Solo boots, and everyone was like into Star Wars. So they were like, who's this guy? And had like kind of like a Luke Skywalker haircut or something. So everyone was like really nice, you know. And I went to school there and picked up the language pretty fast because when you're that young, I think.
How old were you?
I was 9.
Okay.
So like I think at that age you repeat what you hear the way that you hear it, you know, and your brain's like absorbing everything. So I was, you know, it still took like a couple of years, but like, you know, I kind of got the grind and got into it pretty fast. So I think there was like a couple other kids, like my dad's friends who had kids. They kind of all came around the same time to the US to like be in the schmata business. And some of those kids, like 10 years later, still had a French accent, and I couldn't understand why. And then I found out that they had all gone to like Lycée Français or something. And the teachers there are French. So they're like, you know, I don't know, like, this is a cup of coffee, you know, and like the kids like repeated it that way. Meanwhile, I'm in school with like Carlos, and you know, he's like, pass the ball. And I'm like, pass the ball, like repeat it the way that I heard it. So
by the way, schmata is the textile clothing business for people in the Midwest who aren't up with their Yiddish terms.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it, Mike. I appreciate you touching on your Jewish heritage.
That's interesting, though, because your dad was a Sephardic Jew that came from Tunisia. I did some research.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Tunisia was was protected by the French. It was like a territory.
Yeah, I you know, honestly, all I know is that it's right next to Morocco, at the northernest tip of Africa, and that they don't, for some reason, get along, which makes no sense because they're identical, in my opinion. Like their culture, the foods they eat, the way they talk, their jokes, it's the same thing. So I never understood that. But my dad actually left Tunisia at a very, very young age.
Right.
I think it was like 5 years old. He got really sick, and they literally like gave him the little amount of money they had, put him on a train, and they were like, go to Paris to get help because that's where the doctors were.
Well, here's what's interesting, though, because obviously there's a lot. I mean, your dad was growing up Jewish in Paris, and that was its own thing during post World War II. So don't I get all historical?
Yeah.
But what was? I guess my better question is, like, when he moved to Los Angeles, did all of a sudden, like culturally, did he feel a little bit more rooted because there are so many Jewish people in the schmata business? I mean,
It's hard to say. I think people like mostly religion. I feel like people kind of like mostly are in and out in their lives. Like they're really religious. They're not that religious. Sometimes they're just like, I don't have time for this. Sometimes they're like, oh, my life is horrible. I'm going to make a lot of time for it so that I can have a better life. My dad was very, very respectful and very supportive of the Jewish community. We did Shabbat every Friday night. But for him, I think it was much more of like a get your family and friends together. Like it was not your typical religious Shabbat. Our prayer was like 60 seconds. He threw bread at everyone. And then it was like, drink, smoke, like hang out. And we had people that were all different ethnicities, religion. Like it was really cool, actually. He really, he opened it to people instead of going, okay, we're Jewish. We're going to have a Jewish dinner with our Jewish friends. My dad was like, I'm Jewish.
Party. Yeah.
I have dinner with whoever the hell I want. And it was cool because it exposed it to people who may not have had the experience. And frankly, I think our community needs that a little bit more.
So just to kind of mention, because we didn't actually say anything about who you were, where you're from. So anybody that's joining us, Mike Azria is an amazing photographer, but he also happens to be the son of Max Azria, who some of you might remember from BCBG. And while we were talking about you growing up, I just found out something that I had no idea, your dad owned a store that was both on Beverly Drive and at the Beverly Center called Jess.
Yeah.
And as a child, I had so many Jess bags. So of course it was my favorite store. My mother always went in there, but it was also the first reusable bags that people were actually using as like tote bags. And so if you're around in the 80s in LA, you knew Jess and you had a bag, and it was like special.
I remember like girls wearing like Keds, like white Keds, and rocking those bags everywhere. Like
that was the thing. That was the thing. I mean, and that was right around the time I met you. But every girl at school was using one of those Jess bags as a like tote bag, book bag. That was the thing.
I have one somewhere.
And then when you guys came here, was that to open the Jess line into the Jess stores and stuff?
Yeah, I think his dad passed away, and it was literally like overnight. He was like, I'm out of here. I want to go. I think he had a lot of allegiance to his dad. And once his dad passed away, he wanted to start fresh and new. And I think America was, still the land of opportunity. And he wanted to come out here and see what he could do with what he had learned. My dad, I don't even think he graduated high school. And it's amazing because in his 50s and 60s, I would see him at work, like in huge bank meetings with like the top bankers from all over the world. And he was teaching them lessons, which is crazy. Like, he's like a third world guy who didn't have much of an education. He just had the hustle, common sense, respect and whatnot, and big guts.
Yeah, that's what it takes. It takes, not only it takes smarts, but it takes the willingness to roll the dice. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. I recently heard a story of like, and I'll make it real quick and short, but like he had all these orders and he didn't have the money to make it. And he went to the bank and they were like, scram, kid. Cause he was like, like probably wearing a suit twice the size of what he should be wearing. They didn't take him seriously. And he was like, I'm not leaving until I speak to the owner of the bank. It was like the International Bank of Paris, And the guy finally came down and was like, what do you want? And he's like, I want to do business and I can't do business because I have these orders and I don't have money and da-da-da-da-da. And that sort of turned into like, they do that now. Like there's people whose job it is to like fund like
small businesses.
You give your purchase orders and in return they give you like cash and they take a cut of it off of it. Like he was doing that in the 70s.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was cool. And he worked with his brother Serge a lot. And he also has done
equipment,
and Current Elliott. Yeah. So
it's funny because there's quite a few fashion icons that were around during our high school years because like the Guez brothers and then the Marcianos. And it was very like a lot of guys from France, Northern Africa, France that came over in the schmata business.
Going back to when I first met Mike was around 83, 84. It was at a place called Junchong Taekwondo. And Mike.
Cobra Kai. Sorry.
No, but Mike, it was right around that time at the Karate Kid, but
know.
Mike was like the star pupil there. I mean, Mike was a badass. I'm not gonna lie. We can't say it any other way. Mike was.
He looks like Johnny and Kiefer Sutherland in the fucking Lost Boys right now.
Now,
I love it.
Had you done any martial arts when you were living in Europe, or is that something that started when you came here?
No, and I knew that we were going to talk about this, and it made me think, like, when I was like 5 or 6, I had a nanny on the weekends that would take me to Chinatown, and we would see double feature like kung fu flicks, which is crazy because like you hear Tarantino talk about like double action films, right? Like in America. But I actually kind of got to do that in France. It was just all like, you know, Japanese films, Chinese films, probably Korean films. I don't know. So I saw like Jackie Chan films and Bruce Lee films. And if you walked into my bedroom right before I left to come to the United States, my entire wall was drawings of Bruce Lee that I drew.
Oh, wow.
I had, you know, in Chinatown, like I bought like foam nunchucks and like, I had like a silk like karate kimono, but I wasn't studying karate at all. And when I got to LA, I told my mom, I was like, I want to do karate. And we found a studio called Junchong Taekwondo. And just like everything in my life, when I fell in love, I was all in. I was studying 3 hours a day, 6 days a week. And on the 7th day, I'd compete. And that was it. That was my life for.
And that was your own drive.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and he was, I mean, I'm telling you, Mike was the star of the place. And not only that, I mean, so when I left, I think you were a red belt. Did you finish and get your black belt?
Oh, yeah. I got my first degree black belt. I think I was studying to learn stuff to like get my second degree.
Yep.
I left Junchong. There was a little bit of a falling out. I've seen him since. I love him. I love the studio and everyone who goes there. But I went and studied with Simon Rhee, Philip's brother, who was also an instructor at Junchong. And it was cool for me because Master Chong's studio was very traditional Taekwondo, and I was competing a lot. And when I got to Simon Rhee's, there was like all these other movements that were kind of flashier and just kind of fancier, at least to me they were. And I got to use that in competition. So it was like a whole new skill set. And like, instead of doing like a block, like all of a sudden it was like doing these like crazy hand movements. And I was like, wow, this looks really cool. When you know, and I think like right before I quit martial arts altogether for skateboarding, I went to San Diego with a very small group of people. And we did a demonstration for the Olympic Committee to accept Taekwondo as an Olympic sport. I think it took another 4 or 8 years or maybe even longer before it actually became one. But, you know, I remember being at San Diego and like doing this huge performance, like samurai swords and forms and breaking boards, whatever. It was pretty, you know, it was pretty cool. And then my mom handed me this book recently with like old photos, and there was like a little cutout from Black Belt magazine, and it was me sparring, and I was ranked number 3 in all of California at that time.
Yeah. No, Mike was a badass. I'm telling you.
You know what? He's the most humble person too. That's what's so crazy. Like no one ever knew some of this shit about you, even like who your dad was. And that's something that I really, we talked about this before we did this. You were somebody that I was never like close to, but I always felt close to. Like you're always been an amazing human being. So it's nice to know more about you. And I'm going, you really just like, you just kind of just did your thing and always had a smile on your face. And that was,
well, you know, my dad, growing up with my dad, there was a lot of volatility. Like he would be really well off and he would lose everything. Yeah. And then he would, again, rebuild himself, lose everything. I think my dad was like wealthy and bankrupt 3 or 4. I couldn't even tell you how many times, but I grew up with that like high, low. And so actually as a matter of fact, when like my dad reached the apex of his popularity and fashion and wealth at the same time, I never felt comfortable in that. And then I grew up skateboarding and doing graffiti. So I hung out with like real people who had normal jobs who couldn't pay their medical bills. So how the hell was I going to walk around and be arrogant about my dad being wealthy? If anything, sometimes I might have even been embarrassed by it. Yeah. You know?
So I'll tell you a few things as we roll into the skating, because I do remember like I last seen you at Junchong, and then next thing I know, you're like kind of like this West Hollywood skater kid I see you rolling around. First of all, if anybody wants to check out some of the instructors that Mike is talking about, there was a movie called Best of the Best that I think that Phil Reed was in. I don't know if Simon Reed was in it too.
He was in the first one. Philip, Simon Reed were in it. It's actually, believe it or not, like it's like a cult classic martial arts film now. Yeah.
And then even further back, if you can find it, there was a movie called Ninja Turf, and you might have even been in that movie.
I think I might have been in it for like a second. Yeah.
Googling.
So they actually, to give you a little more backstory, old. Mike, they actually came to my dad and wanted him to help finance that movie. Ninja
Interesting.
Turf.
Well, here's a good one for you. Yeah. My dad was very close with a producer named Peter Strauss, who did the Blue Lagoon, and Peter took his kid to Junchong to study because he really liked that I was doing karate. Yep. And Philip Reed financed Best of the Best through Peter Strauss.
Okay.
And they became producing partners, at least I think on the first 2 or 3.
Yeah. Wow. And Eric Roberts was in that movie.
Yeah.
Was Chris Penn in that
movie? Chris Penn was in the movie. Yeah. So, and that's how funny LA is, right? Like you're just doing karate. Next thing you know, you're in a movie, or the person you know is in a movie with all these people that you're like, whoa, well, that's crazy. You know,
I don't even know if you remember this or not, but we're at Junchong, and usually the kids were separate from the adults, but every once in a while there'd be like an overlap where there would be an adult class and a kid class. And I can't remember who said it to me, but this is the 80s, and somebody's like, oh yeah, that's Ron Reagan Jr. That's the president's son right there.
I totally remember that guy. Yeah. And then
funny thing, his son, Ronald Reagan's son, went to my kindergarten. So we come full circle.
Yeah. And
I mean, that's LA. That's
by the
LA.
way, you were saying Cobra Kai earlier. So like, what's the bad dude's name with the long hair?
Oh God,
Terry Silver. The character's name is Terry Silver.
Yes.
Is that his name?
Yeah, I know.
So, that guy, the whole time I watched the original movie and then I watched the TV show, I was like, there's something about this guy. He used to study at Junchong.
Oh, wow. That's
like,
funny.
I remember him being behind me in class, like, because he wasn't a black belt yet or something.
Yep.
And I'm like, they know everybody.
Yeah.
Like,
they do.
They're all connected. Simon Reed is like the head of like the stunt association, like the full on all of LA stunt association. He doubled for like Jackie Chan. He trains all the Cobra Kai kids, including I think Johnny. And I mean, it's like it's such a tiny world.
It is. It's a weird. I think that's one of the reasons that we really wanted to do this podcast.
Yeah, I think it's smart.
Everybody's connected. Like it doesn't really matter where you grew up in LA. You knew kids from all over, and I want to touch base on this quickly because you obviously when you first came to Los Angeles, you lived in Los Feliz. And you were going to a Catholic school over there. At what point did you guys move? And then I want to get into a little bit about what started happening once you moved.
I think it was literally a year. I think it was probably my dad had a 1-year lease, and then we moved. We moved to Beverly Hills. I think we moved to like Foothill, and that's when I started going to Hawthorne Elementary. Still learning the language. I think when I got to Hawthorne, I was like in an ESL class. Like, because my English wasn't that developed, so it was like probably only about a year before I became 90who10 official.
Right.
And
so after you got once you conquered the karate and martial art world, you became a skater, and you also had mentioned that you were doing art when you were younger.
Yeah, it was all like very transitional things, like martial arts. Like I remember when I was studying with Simon Reed in Woodland Hills, like towards the end, after class, there was like a Val Surf next door, right? So I'd go like get skate stuff, and my mom would like just sit in her car and like let me go skate with my friends from the Valley who were studying at Simon Reed. So I would go skateboarding, and then eventually I really fell in love with skateboarding. And I think with martial arts, I wasn't getting a second degree or a third degree black belt. Like I just didn't see myself as a lifer. I have like my attention span is real specific. Like when I fall in love with something, I fall in love with it and I stick with it. And I would have to say that aside from like photography, which I'm now like somewhere between 7 and 9 years in, and I still love it as much as I did day one, sometimes more. I was like just trying new stuff where I could express myself. So martial arts was a form of expression. And then I got into skateboarding. Also, my parents were divorcing around that time. Mm-hmm. So like, I think skateboarding was more rebellious and I could really let out aggression. And it wasn't limited to like a 1 or 2 hour class. You could go skateboard all day. You did it with your friends. And I took that really
somewhere.
Yeah, you'd go, you'd meet people.
Yeah.
And girls thought you were pretty cool because, skateboarders are cool. But I took skateboarding pretty seriously too. I actually got sponsored by Renee's Skate Shop on Melrose. I don't know if you guys remember it. It was called Aaron's All Ears Records, and they had a skate shop in the back. Yeah. So I was sponsored by them, and I think I was about to be
like next to Fairfax. Like right on the other corner.
100. Yeah, it's like an old vintage t-shirt shop now.
Yeah.
And I think I was talking to like some actual skate companies, like where I might have been like at least I think amateur sponsored by some companies. And the funny thing is, people drew on their grip tape a lot in those days in the 80s. They'd draw spider webs or the Rathbone logo or whatever. So I had these like pilot markers that were like silver or gold or black. And I remember one day I was skateboarding in an alley and I saw a trash can and there was like all this writing on it. And I was like, what is that? And like my buddy was like, oh, that's called tagging. And I was like, oh, cool. I was like, and I took my marker and I remember I drew like the Rathbone logo on the trash can. And I really liked doing it. And then so I was like skateboarding and like whenever I was like in an alley or at someone's ramp, I would always like, scribble stuff.
Right.
And then someone told me like, you should write a name because that's what taggers do. Like you're just putting up the Palo Peralta logo. That's kind of pointless. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I like that. It'll be like, I was here. I was here. I was here. And I can't remember what my tag was at the beginning, but so I started writing my name and then I started recognizing other people's names. And then it was like, that's sort of how I got into graffiti. Like eventually I started bumping into people who were like, not skateboarders, they were taggers, and they were like, yeah, I write this. And I'd be like, oh my God, you write that? I see that everywhere. And then I was like,
Discord.
Yeah. And I was like, I want to be like that. Like, I want my name to be written everywhere. I want people to react to me the way that I just reacted to this person. And I think at that age, mostly when you come from like a family that's in the middle of a divorce, you lack the attention and you seek it everywhere. And then you notice it that within graffiti crews, specifically in those days, there was like a brotherhood. I was in a graffiti crew called CBS and eventually a crew called West Coast. But when I was in CBS, our leader was this guy named Skate, who was like a teenager, like a big teenager, but he was older than us. And he really like actually taught us like, like there were rules to doing things properly and like to respect other graffiti writers or not. And like, so there's like this whole code and it was kind of like playing army. Like, you go to like a paint store and like steal spray paint. Like it was super exciting. You'd be tagging, running from the police and you'd get away with it. You were like, yeah, I got away. Like, and then that grew into its own thing where like, I was like one of the more up graffiti writers in the late 80s, early 90s. And people were like, yo, like, how did you get up on that roof and do that mural? And, so it was cool. And then I got arrested too many times.
Right.
It was so abstract. Like here I went to like Beverly Hills High School, continuation mostly. On the weekends, I'm like in East LA, like painting with like gangster ass. Like some of these guys were like, most graph writers I knew were graph writers, but some of them like crossed over, like they were a little bit of both. And I remember one time I was painting in East LA. Like we started at like midnight. Now it's like 3 a.m. We're just wrecking it. And I was with this guy. I think I was with this guy who wrote Key, K-E-Y, Latino guy. And we got pulled over and the cop's like, do you know where we pulled you over? And we're like, it's kind of obvious. And he was like, you shouldn't be in this neighborhood to me. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, cool.
That's actually interesting. I mean, well, number one, there is a documentary that you can find on YouTube called Can't Be Stopped. And it's all about the CBS tagging crew in the late 80s and early 90s. And it is quintessential Los Angeles heritage history that everybody needs to watch.
Yeah,
there's also another one coming out soon about ballistics. Just a little plug for that one. But
it's awesome.
They all kind of go hand in hand. But here's a question for you, because I do think it's very interesting that you were able to kind of be accepted amongst a group of your peers, essentially,
Yeah.
who obviously did come from very different backgrounds. And because you were being raised in Beverly Hills and you were more or less one of those kids, how did you assimilate into a little bit more of like, I mean, obviously the art maybe bonded you guys,
Yeah.
but like how did they view you? I mean, you're the nicest person I've ever met, but like, how did you, yeah.
So
yeah,
it's funny because they talk about that in the documentary a little bit. It was very weird because Skate started recruiting graffiti writers that went to Beverly. And I think Clayton Wong was one of them, Jason Trowbridge, like a couple of these guys. And then it was like me, Yeshi Pearl, Mickey Avalon, Armin, Andre Legacy. And at first there was definitely a lot of resistance. Matter of fact, I had beef with one of the biggest, scariest dudes in the crew named Anger, appropriately. And everyone was like terrified of this guy. And so was I, by the way. I think I tagged in his neighborhood, like really close to his house, and it pissed him off or something. But then we met and luckily did not fight and pieced it out. And he's like my brother still till this day. I talk to him like, once every couple of weeks or a month or whatever. And we even get together and hang out and paint every once in a while, still till this day. But I think part of it had to do with Yeshi, myself, and Armin. We were sort of Beverly Hills adjacent. We lived like that one block before you're out of the Beverly Hills district, which made it permissible for us to go to Beverly High. But like we weren't really Beverly kids. We weren't rich. We didn't have money. We didn't have new clothes. I remember I would go to Beverly and everyone had like nice cars and nice clothes. And like I'd show up with like a brand new starter jacket and people would be like, dude, that's dope. And I'd be like, thanks. I didn't tell them that I stole it.
But this must be, so you talked earlier about, and by the way, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying about, just because being involved kind of a little bit in the hip hop scene, and coming from Beverly Hills, but then dealing with people who weren't from, financially well-off backgrounds and kind of having to prove yourself or just trying to fit in. So I totally can relate to that. And then you had talked about, your dad maybe going through some of these financial ups and downs, because again, I never saw your bank account or anything like that, but when I met you at June Chong, it was kind of like the height of Jess, and it seemed like you guys were doing pretty well from what it seemed like
at that time. We were
right. And then I think at this time, from just watching from afar and knowing you, and then when you got into like this kind of like skate crew tagging stuff, it was kind of like after Jess and before BCB, what is it? How do you? BCBG Max. Yeah. And so this, I'm assuming this is kind of one of the times when your dad was maybe having a rougher time with finances.
100%.
And post-divorce, I'm guessing.
But the funny thing I'm thinking about is, and again, I know it's not everything, but it's funny to me though, as they're looking at you as this like Beverly Hills guy, I also know that you could hold your own if shit came down to it. So it's kind of funny.
Did they know that you were a lethal weapon? Did they know that?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like my drinking buddies later on after my graffiti experiences noticed it, and they were like, holy shit, like Mike, like what? Yeah. But I hated fighting. I always hated fighting. Like I did not like that adrenaline. Some people like that is a drug for them. They love the adrenaline. I hated it. I always stayed away from it. I just wanted to tag. I wanted to go on these like little missions, climb on roofs, paint. I didn't want to fight with a bunch of people. And also like back in those days, like you guys, I think you'll remember this, but like, people are talking about now, like how dangerous LA is. And I'm not disagreeing. It's a little crazy, but I feel like it was a lot more dangerous in the late 80s, early 90s. Like when there were fights, like people got stabbed, like people got like shot. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen.
It's a different thing because
there's
like for us,
because there's video.
But for us, but the thing about, and I get what you're saying, like in our time, late 80s, early 90s, there was the height of like the Crips and the Bloods. Everybody wanted to be a gangster. Everybody wanted to be a badass. I knew people who were walking around carrying guns, and didn't realize the long-term effects of using those types of, you know, things.
Right.
So I mean, you had to be careful of who you said and what you said. And then, again, you never know when you're dealing with a crazy person. But back then, there was a higher probability of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person and maybe getting stabbed or shot. But right now with LA is just, and I don't want to go political, but just because of the political climate, there's no consequences for committing crimes right now. And so that's why the criminal aspect, criminal robberies and that kind of thing is higher than it's ever been in LA, because there's no repercussions for it. But it's on like a lower level of like saying the wrong thing to the wrong dude and maybe getting shot. It was a little crazier back then.
Not even that. I also, just to take it one step further, I think, you know, people nowadays, unfortunately, we can go down the rabbit hole on this one, but people nowadays, like, they can hide behind this and have like, you know, they can attack somebody from their keyboard.
Right.
And that's dangerous unto itself. However, when we were growing up, every party I went to in high school, there was a brutal fight.
That's what I mean.
And not just like a small fight, like broken noses. I remember after my specific high school graduation, there was a terrible fight that was peripheral to me. Somehow I was related, where a guy went to the hospital. Right. And but nowadays you'd be sued, you'd go to jail, like all of those things.
And it would be on camera.
It would be on camera.
And it'd be on camera. So, but the thing is, when we were kids, though, everybody wanted to be a gangster. You know, everybody wanted to be a badass.
I was just going to say that.
Now, you know, my daughter's in her second year of college. My son is in his senior year of high school, and my youngest daughter just started high school. And kids are not like that now. They're not trying to be badasses or hard asses. So it's totally different.
But it was what we were growing up with, right?
That's what I feel was the most dangerous. Like, I remember, like, first of all, everyone was dressing like a gangster, right? Everyone had the hat with the low brim, like baggy pants, whatever. But what was scary about it is, like, some kids felt like they had to prove themselves, maybe because they were from Beverly Hills and they weren't going to get the proper street cred until they did something really bad. And that's dangerous. Yeah. You know, like, that's ultimately really, really dangerous. And yeah, so I feel like, personally, and what you said about the like fights at every party, like, I never went to a club or a party where there was not a violent outburst. Yeah. And it was like, there wasn't a lot of common sense used, like people grabbing bottles, smashing them across people's heads, cutting people. Like, I was like, dude, and I got used to it. Like, that's the craziest thing, is like, you got used to it. And now I don't feel like it's like that at all. But now we do have a lot of crazy people on the streets, homeless people.
And they have other problems. And the kids have other problems with the fentanyl and
or mass shootings. Now we just worry.
I want to get back to you and your life, and so now you're part of this tagging and skating crew, and now your dad is starting this new company, BCBG Mike Azria, and tell us a little bit about that and what that turned into.
It's a tough one. So I will say, I was tagging. I was super recognized in LA, like so much so that I was in CBS, and then I was asked to be in West Coast Artists, WCA, which is like, was at that point like the dopest crew in the sense of like doing murals, whereas CBS was probably like the most up, like their tags were everywhere, and we were also pretty badass, like we were tough guys, you know? So like everyone was kind of scared of them. And then I got arrested, like, I don't know, it was like a weird thing. It was like in a 6-month period, I got arrested like 4 times or something like that. And I was on probation for it. I was underage. Like, I was like 16, 17.
And were your parents getting pissed off?
Oh yeah. Like, that's when my parents were really supportive of me doing graffiti. They're like, oh, it's art. It's cool. You could do it. Like, but then I started getting, like, no one wants to get the 3 a.m. phone call. Hey, your son's at the Burbank Police Department. Come pick him up. Like, that's not fun.
Especially in Burbank. I'm
yeah. No, seriously. It's a far drive. Yeah. So they started getting pissed, and I got really lucky. I went to court, and there was a judge, and he was like, dude, he was like, look at this record. He's like, what are you doing with your life? He's like, I'm going to give you 10 days of this thing called Juvenile Awareness Work Services, which was real gnarly. And he was like, but you have to go get a physical checkup, and you're going to go do that at juvie. So he sent me to juvie to see what it was like there. And when I walked into that place, I was like, there is no place for me here. Zero. Yeah. I'm not these people. I don't come from where these guys come from. And their freedom has been taken away. That's like part of doing graffiti is freedom for me. It's not, I don't want the opposite, right?
Yep.
And then I just sort of like phased out, just kind of, you know, and I never went away. Like, believe it or not, I still sketch sometimes when I'm like feeling, I don't know, bored or anxious. Like it's like something for me to focus on. Like actually those things are pillowcases. I'm launching a pillowcase collection of people's names with graffiti letters on them, sort of like the Jess bags, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
So I'm doing this whole collection, and it's weird, like at my age that I'm thinking of doing that, but it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. In retrospect, I always look back at graffiti and I think like it taught me independence. It taught me like how to protect myself, taught me to, you know, not be scared in adventurous situations, although I fluctuate with that still. And, you know, even in photography is all about color and proportion and 3D and highlights. And so is graffiti. So, you know, they're very similar. So I have like a big love and respect for it. And as I was phasing away from graffiti, my father had just gotten back on his feet. I think someone lent him, I don't know what the amount was exactly, but it's probably like $100,000 or $150,000. And he started
in 1990s money, by the way. In 1990s money.
And he started, it was like 92 maybe or something like that. And he started making these like slinky jersey skirts. It's like a stretchy fabric, and like it was new. No one had really seen it. And then like I remember he was going to department stores, knocking on their doors, going, "Please buy my skirts." And they were like, "Okay, yeah, these are cool. We've never seen this fabric. This is cool." They started doing really well with it, and then he made a skirt and a top to go with it. And that's literally how his company started to develop. He just did it like one piece at a time. And, you know, he grew from like a little office to like 2 little offices to like the entire floor of like 9th Street in Los Angeles or something, like somewhere right around there. And at that point, as I graduated high school, I got on a plane for New York. I wanted to get out of LA. I didn't want to be here anymore. I just had my dose. I wanted my own freedom and independence. And my buddy Gavin and I, who was also like a former skateboard friend and also a former graffiti friend, we just flew to New York. Like we put like stuff in boxes for our parents to ship to us. We got a plane ticket. We flew into JFK. This is again kind of like me coming to America from France. I land in New York, like TWA terminal. We get in a cab. Guy goes, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "New York." And he's like, "You're in New York." And I was like, "Oh." And he was like, "What city?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Brooklyn, Queens," you know, like named all these places. I was like, "Where's the Empire State Building?" And he goes, "Manhattan." I go, "That's where we're going." And he goes, "Okay." And he starts driving us. And as he's driving, I said, "You know, we don't have a lot of money, but we need to find a place to stay until we can find an apartment." And he was like, "Okay, so you want like a cheap hotel in Manhattan?" I was like, "Yeah." And funny enough, he dropped us off at the Chelsea Hotel.
Oh my God.
That's crazy. And that's where we stayed for like the first 2 weeks until we found an apartment. And so I lived in New York for almost 2 years. And I'm sure we're going to revert back to my New York days at some point in this conversation. But when I left New York to come back to LA, my dad was a very well-off man with a brand that was growing at an incredible speed.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, you know, within that decade, it was like on some whole other level. Like,
I don't know
private jets, yachts.
One girl that didn't have a BCBG out.
I know.
I mean,
I had an original one, and I remember the original tag. I have a picture of me wearing it for my 16th birthday. It was a red, that silky stretch material, because you know that was sexy back then.
Yeah.
And it was a leotard, and it had a deep low back, and it was just, it fit women's bodies very well, and it's everywhere.
And there were billboards all over the city. I mean, all over the city. Yeah. And I remember one in particular, I think, I don't know why I have this image in my head, but of like your dad, and you know, from seeing him on the billboards, I know what he looks like. He was like, you know, he had the bald head, and he was kind of like a little stockier man. And there's why I don't know, I don't have this picture in my head of like a model or two like kissing him on the head from the billboard. I think that's
possible.
What it was. Yeah.
I mean, he had BCBG for like 20 something years. So like it really spanned, like towards the end, he was doing like collection with like Miley Cyrus.
Right.
Yep.
You know, and I remember a photo of him going like this, and Miley's like got her back to him, like crossing arms. You know, like it was really, he would sell to high-end stores, middle-end stores, and then like Walmart. You know, like he just saw it as like this never-ending thing, because if you can design for the top department stores, then why wouldn't you be able to design for the other department stores? I think he paved a lot of ways for people to take
Private
fashion to like,
yeah,
all that. Yeah.
And celebrities too. I mean, in doing some research from the interview, just doing a little quick reading. I mean, he was dressing people for the Oscars, you know, and stuff like that, you know. So
yeah,
I mean, it was big. It was huge.
So he was a creative and a businessman.
Yes, absolutely.
That's rare, because usually it's like one side and the other side, you know. So
I know. I would see him go into the design room, like where like the collection was ready, and he would look at it, and he'd be like, "No," and he'd be like, "Yes, let's make this actually in more colors." And I was like, it's so weird, because it's not like he didn't go to design school, but he understood the market. Yeah. He loved women, and I think understood what would look good on a woman. That was, you know, one of his many gifts or talents.
And what were you doing? Sorry, what were you doing when you were living in New York?
So when I moved to New York, I didn't go there with like a master plan or anything. You know, I just was like, I want to go to New York and live there. I did everything. I sold discount tickets to Broadway in the snow, you know, like trying to make money. I bar backed. I eventually got my real estate license when I turned, literally as I turned, I think on my 18th birthday, I was taking the test, and I, like a week later or something, I got my license. I was the youngest real estate agent in Manhattan at that time. And I started doing residential leasing with the same agency that had found Gavin and I our first apartment. I don't know why. I think we need to break our lease or something. And the guy was like, you guys are cool. He's like, I like the way you dress. I like the way you guys are. He's like, why don't you guys get into real estate? And we were like, okay, like, really? Like real estate? We're young. Like, you guys are old. And they're like, it doesn't matter. They're like, just get your license. And I was like, all right, that sounds promising. Like, I'll be a real estate agent. And I did that for like 6 months. And then another winter came, and it was just so brutal out there, walking around, showing apartments. My dad was like, we miss you. Please come back. And I was like, warm weather, California, my family, myself. Like at that point, Gavin had moved back to LA. And so I was living there by myself. But I had a great group of friends, and it was such a great time. It was like 93, 94, you know, and it was like Wu-Tang Clan, Redman, all these just amazing rap groups are coming out. Biggie. I remember getting a tape with all those guys on a mixtape. Nobody knew who they were. I was listening to them on the street with my Walkman or whatever. And I remember going to like clubs with like, I remember walking to this one club. Redman was in line behind me. And back then they didn't do you favors because you were famous. It was like, this is a club. That's a line. You walk in. That's what it is, right? So I walk in before Redman. He walks in behind me. I'm on the dance floor. Johnny Depp and Kate Moss are dancing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was like, it was called Soul Kitchen.
Yeah.
It was shit. I know exactly. Yeah.
It was such a sick club. So New York was just awesome then. And, you know, after I moved back to LA, I actually would go and visit all the time. I'd go there minimum 3-4 times a year. 2 of the times my dad was doing runway shows out there. He would do like, you know, seasons and whatnot.
Well, that's what I'm going to ask you. It's because as you're telling the story, some things are starting to line up in my head. Mm-hmm. And like, so, you know, now BCBG is getting big. You know, your dad is, you know, one of the giants of the fashion industry. New York is like the height of the fashion world. Paris and New York, you know, when you're going to these clubs, are people knowing, you know, who your dad is? Are you going right to the front of the line? What's going on with that?
When I moved back from New York to LA, I decided that I wanted to be a filmmaker. I went to UCLA Extension. I took some film courses. One of my teachers suggested I take an acting class to learn how to direct my actors. And I was like, that sounds really cool, because I really wanted to, you know, I'd seen what like Francis Coppola was like, and he was always working with his actors, and his actors always talked about how he was such a giving director. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And I went in to take a class from this fantastic woman named Janet Alejante, who coached everybody. She coached like Toby and DiCaprio and all these guys. I didn't know that till much later on. but she was humble. She was like a New York lady, you know, taught acting. And she was like, I couldn't just be in class. I had to like actually do some of the stuff that the actors were doing. And after, as I was doing it, I was like, I kind of like this acting thing. And then she like really capped it. She was like, dude, I don't understand. She's like, you have a good look. You're really good in class. Why aren't you trying to act? And I was like, because I want to be a director. And she's like, so be a director, but be an actor. And I was like, okay, that seems interesting. And, you know, growing up as a skateboarder, I'd been flagged down to like I did like an ad for Surf Fetish or something. I won a tournament, second place, and it was total bullshit, to be on Sidekicks with Ernie Reyes.
Yeah.
And I was on that show. That was like a $500 paycheck from Disney when I was a little kid. I was like, whoa, $500 to do this? That's cool. So I got into acting, and my lifestyle changed a little bit. I really just focused on acting, and I would hang out with a lot of actors who generally didn't have a lot of money and didn't go clubbing. They hung out at bars, like dive bars, you know?
Yep.
So I know all the clubs in LA. I know where everyone went. Not saying I never ever went, but I pretty much didn't. I was much more of like went to Formosa, The Room, like all these spots in LA.
The Dime was a big one. I loved the Dime.
Yeah. That, for me, that was a little later on, but like had gone there, you know. I was reading a lot of Charles Bukowski. So I didn't want the cookie cutter bar. I wanted the nasty bar.
Snake pit. Oh, I'm a dive bar girl.
That wasn't even diving.
That wasn't. That was on Melrose.
No,
totally.
Yeah, it was on Melrose.
I totally hear you. Yeah.
So I didn't. This is to lead back to your question about did I go to clubs? Did I wait in line? I started bartending also, because like that's sort of what you did as an actor. You bartended, and I actually threw some clubs, like little ones, and it got involved in promoting. I would promote my club and bartend it too. So it's the craziest thing in the world. And I remember hiring DJ Scott Oster for my club. And here I am like hiring like a skate legend to DJ my nightclub. Like how cool is that? And I'm making money at the door, and I'm making money at the bar, and I'm hanging out with my friends, and it was a very good time. I'm booking national commercials left and right, Starburst, Coke. Like at 21 or 22, I was making I probably made like 150,000 that year. That's back then. That's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, this is cool. This is going to be my career. My dad's company was still growing. As I hit like my 30s and his company really got big, he started doing his fashion shows, and every time there would be a wrap party. And those wrap parties were usually at nightclubs that were about to open and become the next biggest nightclub. Marquee, Tao, all those. Like I remember I got kicked out of Marquee forever before it even opened.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, I was
That's a good story. I'd like to hear.
Honestly, I was a big delinquent. I was just like, you know what? It was like the 2000s. Everyone I knew drank. Nobody drank normally. Everybody was like, pop. And, you know, we're a little rebellious from the 90s, I think. So, you know, but I had an awesome time and a very fun time with that. Yeah. So I didn't expect to be let in, but a lot of times people would be like, I think that dude's Max's son, like you should let him in. Or, you know, I hung out at Bungalow 8 in New York before they started letting people in there.
Yeah.
Like it was me and my dad and Amy Sacco, the lady who was promoting that place, like just chilling. And I was like, where are all the people? She's like, I don't really let anybody in. She literally like had like,
I believe it.
By like 2 a.m, there was like 20 people in there. And that was what she did to make sure that everyone was waiting outside. And eventually she started letting people in, and it was just like huge, you know, club.
What started the shift from acting to photography?
You know, because I bounced around. I'm an artist. Like I really, and even that, like sometimes I struggle saying that. I like things that interest me, and I'm very visual. I know that much. I liked furniture. I like mid-century modern furniture. So I started buying it from like the Midwest on eBay. I was like American Pickers without leaving my house, right? It was like buying like 6 Herman Miller chairs, like fiberglass chairs, for like $120 and selling them for like $600 a piece.
Right. So funny.
Here.
It's so funny.
And then but to sell them, I had to take photos. And I realized the better my photos were, the more it painted a picture for the potential customer, right? So I'd take like these beautiful photos, like hardwood floors, da da da. And then I remember going like, how do I light this? Because like this photo looks great, but this one doesn't look good. And that's when I caught the photography bug. I was like, I know I need a flash. Okay, I bought a flash. I need a better camera. I bought a camera. And then I started taking pictures and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then I was like, I think as my pillowcase business was fizzling out and as I was doing the furniture stuff, I was like, I need a trade. People have trades. Like I'm at that age now. I need a trade. And the trade I decided to do was photography. And fashion just seemed like the right thing. Like I loved taking pictures. I'd grown up around fashion. I understood the aesthetics and sort of what was important. And I was single. So like, it was like, I'm going to be around beautiful women all day. Like what else could make you want to wake up early in the morning and go to work? Like that's the perfect thing. Totally. So that's sort of what got me started. But now it's like all the stuff, the reasons that I started are like behind me. Now I'm just like, I just want to be better. I always want to be better. I always want to do better. I want to always maximize the return for my client, because I know that these companies, a lot of them are struggling. It's hard out there. And photo shoots are expensive. And I see a lot of photographers going in like, oh, I'm a photographer, or just like, I do what I do. And then you guys just deal with that. I'm not like that. I'm like, I want to be a team member with my client. Before I get there, I want to make sure I'm not leaving anything, lights, flashes, batteries, da, da, da. Are we shooting indoor? Are we shooting outdoor? How many SKUs are we shooting? How much time do we have? What models are you thinking of using? I think this one's going to be the best for us. Like I really get like hands-on. Yeah. So like I said, and I've been doing that for like 8 or 9 years. And it's the first time in my life that I'm still like, I still love what I do. Now,
do you know what I love about most is that you have kind of followed your bliss in a lot of ways, but in like the best possible way. And I feel, I just had a conversation with somebody recently about setting goals and, sometimes people that set goals and then people that kind of let the wind take them where it's going to take them.
Yeah.
And strangely, the universe, because I'm kind of similar-ish, the universe somehow has your back. And just by going through all the things that you coming here as technically an immigrant and then kind of living in this playground of debauchery and culture and artistry, and then kind of moving through that and also touching some of this strange LA wealth side of things. What's next for you? Like, I know that sounds crazy. Like, where are you going now? What do you want to do now?
It's a tough question. I don't know if you guys.
What haven't you done?
There's a lot. There's so much that I haven't done, and it's an interesting thing. Like getting to the age that we're at now and having experienced what we've gotten to experience. There's a part of me that's like, I just want to keep doing what I'm doing and stay put and like, get the cute little house and like hopefully meet the right person, fall in love, and probably not start a family. I think it's getting to that place where I might be a little older and maybe I don't need that.
I'm exhausted.
But I would say, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you have to do it.
That's true.
Because I could probably be a really good serial killer or a really good detective. But I don't want to be either one of those things.
Aside from being a dad or a serial killer, what's next?
Yeah, what do you want to do? What
do you want to? It sounds like are you thinking about making films now that you have this this whole is that something you want to circle back to?
No, I think I want to continue to do photography for as long as photography will have me, because now it's like, it used to be a trade and now it's becoming like all these kids just go out and buy a Sony A7R4 with auto tracking, watch a bunch of YouTube videos, and then you have AI. So you have all these things and I have to sort of be cognizant of that. And I don't want to be part of the film business. I hate it. I can't stand it. Not to say that fashion is all like great, but but the people I work with are generally kind and fun to work with, and I feel close to my family and my heritage when I work in fashion.
Yeah.
So I think I want to do that, or, and like I said, I'm like launching this pillowcase company. I'm interested to see where that goes. It's like a reincarnation of what I already experienced, but it's very different because back then the business model was wholesale. Today it's direct to consumer, which means that aside from the producing and, stock fulfillment and all that, the main part is creating advertisement. So I am going to get behind the camera. I am going to shoot the product. I'm going to start getting into videos and shooting video. And that is sort of making me want to go, okay, well, if I'm going to get up in the video thing, then I could also potentially like do tutorials for photography. When I was trying to learn photography, every door I knocked on like spit on me. Like photographers, there's something about it. Most photographers don't like sharing their information unless it's for social media and they get followers out of it, and then deals with like, Canon and Westcott and whatever. One of my favorite things about photography is to share it. Like I love my assistants are my friends usually. And I love teaching them and I love giving them that knowledge, because I know that when I was given that knowledge, I nurtured it and it turned into something really great for me. And I like want to be able to share that with people. So that might be part of it.
I love that. You have such an amazing just aura about you that I know that whatever you do, whether it's, having a pillowcase company or being a photographer or even going into teaching mentorship masterclass, I think you're going to do. I so appreciate you for being here and doing this with us.
Thank you guys for having me.
And really,
Mike, thanks so much. It's so good to see you.
Who knew when we knew each other that we would be sitting here today talking about this stuff?
Like the Jetsons.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's great to see you, man. Hope to see you, as the kids say, IRL real soon too.
Yes.
Nice to see you too, brother.
Yeah.
Jess, am I seeing you at the reunion?
Which one? There's a Oh no, I graduated in '94. But I'll go as your date.
No one's perfect.
Anyway, this has been another episode of 90who10. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's guest was Mike Azria. As we said earlier, if you want to check out some of these interesting historical pieces of Los Angeles, you should watch Can't Be Stopped, the documentary, and also look at that the movie, The Best of the Best.
Sure. Go to Best of the Best.
All the things.
And Ninja Turf, if you want to go way back.
Ninja Turf. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. And Dan and I will be back with our next guest, who we have no idea who we're going to book next. So let's just see where this goes.
William Zabka.
That's it.
That's it. We're not booking him. Maybe. Who knows?
You never know.
You never know. He's a nice guy here.
You got to pick 90210 guys. Like Lenny Kravitz.
Oh, that
Lenny Kravitz.
Awesome. Work on that
pretty
one,
cool.
Dan.
Yeah.
Work on that
All right,
one.
guys.
He might be interesting.
Yeah,
all right, we'll
maybe
talk
just
to
a
you
little.
later.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.